Before we dig into today's episode, I want to take a moment and talk about something close to my home, my journey into podcasting. Dog with a Bone is my first season, and I am beyond grateful to have teamed up with James Basinger and Sasquatch Productions. If you're into deep dives, real boots on the ground investigations, and the kind of storytelling that leaves no stone unturned, you'll want to check out James's own podcast, Hide and Seek. He's currently working on season 4, but if you haven't yet, I highly recommend starting with season 1 through 3. They're all out now. Everyone, and welcome back to Dog with a Bone podcast. This is episode 9, Black Velvet and Coke. Please make sure to like and follow us on Dog with a Bone Facebook or Instagram page to join in on the investigation as we move through the season. I would love to hear your thoughts on the episodes previously and the ones to come. You can also subscribe to Dog with a Bone podcast on Spotify or wherever you listen so you don't miss an episode. All names mentioned are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. First, I just want to take a moment and thank you all for the great questions and comments in last week's episode. I don't know about you, but I really enjoyed myself. The episode allowed me to provide more insight into different aspects of the investigation. And you also got to hear more of my personality and my journey into podcasting. But let's get right back to it. I want to continue to move forward through the investigation and pick up right where we left off. Me, back in Marysville. While I was in town, I wanted to dig into whether John and Alan could have returned to Bernie's house and committed the murder. The main goal of any investigation is to remove people off the murder board. But before I could remove John and Alan's name from the board, I had one more person that I needed to speak to. And who is that person? Her name is Olivia. Olivia was John's girlfriend at the time and his alibi. I wanted to know if Olivia was with John after getting off work around midnight, which was around the time Bernie had called the cops, and what they did after the bar closed. My team and I met up with Olivia after we left our interview with Eric. We decided to connect at a local restaurant, which is the source of all the background noise you are about to hear. Here's what Olivia had to say.
I've never even met John Burnside. Not one time. Don't know the guy. I only knew of him because there wasn't very many people in Marysville that had them kind of crutches. And I knew he worked Honda. That's it. But his dad, years later, came to my house. And it was after I had my daughter. Right after. And the anguish on that man's face. And being a parent, you're like, man. But there's nothing more that I know. I know what I heard. I know what... I was at work till midnight. So, that leaves me out of it. My boyfriend had used my car. And the story goes, because he never told me directly.
Who was your boyfriend?
It was John at the time.
Who drove you to the restaurant to work? Did somebody drive you?
Yeah.
John drove you.
A lot's got to do with Eric and Botima because they apparently dropped him off. He went to get something, and this is by Eric telling me years later, and this is just a passing. Like I said, it's still a mystery, but you put enough clues together, and I'm telling you right now, to me, it's all fucking Marysville Police Department. Glenn was a dirty piece of shit.
So where did you and John do after the hideaway?
I would assume we went home.
Did you and John party?
We did go home because we didn't go anywhere else.
Olivia told me that her and John returned home after the bar closed, but I also wanted to know, was it possible that her and John drove by Bernie's house afterwards or saw anything unusual?
I don't remember driving by Bernie's. Okay. I didn't have no reason to go out that way.
Okay. Where did you live?
With John.
And John lived where at that time? So which way is that? Is that past
That's headed northwest. And from the hideaway
yeah.
you would have been heading southeast.
Away from Berkeley.
Almost complete opposite.
So, yeah, Olivia is confirming that her and John did not drive past Bernie's house on their way home, which would have been when the cops were still there. Another thing I wanted to know, since John hasn't agreed to talk to me, is did he ever talk about the burglary or the murder with her?
So John never said to you, yeah, we were going to break into the safe and attempt it. He never mentioned that to you.
I tried to get it out of him. I tried to do the whole half drunken and passed out thing. I tried everything. Trust me. Because I wanted to know the truth. But then it became, I don't know one way or the other, but I heard it too much through the grapevine.
Olivia believes that, yeah, John broke into Bernie's house based on what she has heard over the years. However, Olivia does not recall John ever leaving the house once they got home. I had known that Olivia testified in John's burglary case, so I asked her about it. And Olivia said the cops wanted her to say one thing, but she wouldn't do it.
What did they want you to say?
Oh, they wanted me to say John and Alan's breaking in that fucking house. Cops.
What cops?
City cops.
Do you know their names?
Rick Coots, Glenn Nickel.
They wanted you to say John did it.
Oh, fuck yeah.
And what happens when...
Even on the stand, it was like that. They were trying to rope-a-dope with words.
And what
I'm really good with words. That's all they wanted me to say, because that way they could put John and Ray in the house. That way, but they weren't expecting Eric and Botima to be... They didn't know they dropped John Burnside. I didn't know that. I didn't know that until I seen Eric years later.
After meeting with Olivia, she confirms the same account that after the bar closed, everyone went their separate ways. This means that Joe, Ray, Alan, and now Olivia would all have to be lying to make this not true. That's a lot of people and stories to keep straight if it were a lie. We also heard that Olivia had attempted to get information from John, but was not successful. However, we do have one person who flat out asked John if he killed Bernie. Who did this? It was Bo. Bo asked John directly if he was responsible for Bernie's murder. A quick background on Bo: she actually dated John for several years. Bo tells me what John said when she asked him.
Have you heard the rumor that there was two individuals, John and somebody else, who were the ones responsible for Bernie's death? Have you heard that?
I've heard it, but I don't believe it.
John and Alan.
Yep.
Why don't you believe that?
Just because I dated John like for probably 5 or 6 years. I mean, we were pretty exclusive for a very long time, and I just know him well enough to know that there's no way in hell that he would do something like that. Do I think he would have broke into his house and been the one that maybe broke in, that got the call started? Absolutely, 100%. But do I think it went any further? No. I think if they were the ones that broke in, they were already long gone.
Did you ever talk to John about this?
I asked him if he killed him, and he said no. But, I mean, even I guess if he would have, he wouldn't have admitted it to me.
Did you feel that he was telling you the truth?
I do feel that he was telling me the truth. When all this stuff came up, I do recall asking him, this is out there in left field. Did you do this? And he was like, absolutely not. So.
Did he expand any more on who he thought did it? Or, yes, we stole the safe? Did he...
No, I didn't even ask him. I didn't even go down that road of asking him a question. My question was just direct. Did you kill him? Answer was no.
Bo has been extremely helpful in the investigation, and to me, very credible. She asked John directly if he was responsible, and he said no. But I will say, it is really hard to believe that someone you love or care about could be capable of such a crime. And often, when push does come to shove, some people do things that they didn't even know they were capable of. So I have to take all of this information into consideration but I've got to make a move soon on the murder board. The next item on my list was to call Joe. I wanted to follow back up with Joe again to discuss my interview with Eric and to get her thoughts about his denial of being involved in the setup of the burglary. Joe's name was also in Bernie's dad's books from when he had spoken to her, so I had a few more questions about the information listed in there. I'm here in Marysville.
Oh, really?
I made it here, so I've been investigating, and I actually met with Eric. So some things that Eric is telling me, of course, isn't adding up. So
They're not going to.
No, but this is why you're so helpful. I have all of his dad's notes too, which is amazing. Thank you for talking to his dad so many times. You were very helpful in all of that, and you're matching up exactly what you've told me. But some things that I have questions on. I just was reading something, and maybe I'll read it to you. This is what his dad wrote, like a conversation with you, and see if you can help me figure it out. Okay? It says, Eric was telling them what was in the safe. Several $100s, 24 ounces of coke or other drugs, told them about Burnside's house, the patio door and the alarm system on Telephone Breezeway, doorway dark, had a steel pipe and slide door to lift up. Her words, he had everything to do with the Burnside break-in. She said he was there. Was Eric there for the break-in?
Eric set it up. He's the one who lured Burnside to the bar and kept him away from the house while John and Alan went in.
How is the steel pipe involved?
I don't remember that.
Okay.
But if there was a steel pipe, maybe it was fitted behind the door, so I don't know, so the door couldn't open any further.
And that's how he was able to get in?
Eric's the one who unlocked that door so they could get in.
When I talked to him, he told me that there was no drugs or money in that safe.
Yes, there was.
Yeah.
The cops will tell you that. They have it on their inventory.
No, I know, but that's why he's saying that it wasn't, they planted it.
Bullshit. That's why Burnside went back to the house, because he was confident some dope that he was selling up there at Steppens. And Eric had him up at the bar, so Eric had to take him back home to get a bag, take back up to Steppens.
Was Jackie involved in this?
No. Jackie was Eric's sister, right?
Yes.
No.
She wasn't part of the setup?
No, not that I know of. I was usually the only girl around. Alan kept me real close. When they discussed doing this and how Eric was going to go about the house and get Burnside out and everything, I mean, into detail, they were just sitting around our kitchen table. Like it's a casual conversation.
Women, we always know and we hear and we pay attention. And so I've been worried and wondering about Jackie, so that it was only Eric, and Eric denies, of course, any of this.
And he always does. He's going to admit to doing it, you know.
What house were you at when you guys were discussing? My partner's here. Huh?
The house in Claiborne, where Alan lived there with his wife, Tabby.
Okay, that's right. It's in his dad's notes on Claiborne. Do you think that Eric, if he saw anything that went down there, that Eric would be quiet?
Come forward.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on what. Say he got in trouble and was looking at some time, because he was one of the boys. He talked a real tough game, and it seemed real tough. But when it came down to it, if he thought he was even going to do 3 days in jail, he was not going to have it. Yeah, he would sing like a bird.
Vicky clarifies with Joe again about when Eric claims that he saw her.
Eric said that he saw you and Alan and John drive past the house like multiple times, like you guys just kept pacing back and forth down the road.
The only thing I did was leave the bar, which was close to 6th Street. They did have me drive, but we didn't drive all the way down the road. We didn't go past the house. We turned on 7th or 8th Street or whatever one of the little parallel streets are. We didn't. You couldn't even get closer. There's lights everywhere. Okay. So there's no way he's seen me at the house. John and Alan left the house when they got the wheelbarrow stuck. Well, they say stuck in the wheelbarrow beside the house because it's raining cats and dogs, and it's a stupid move for criminals anyway, but whatever. They came back to the Hideaway Bar to get Alan's brother, Rainey. I don't even know where the car was parked at this time, but they didn't park the car at Bernie's. So they went back to the house, and I think that might be when maybe Eric saw him.
Yeah.
Because that's when the police were there,
Yeah.
when Bernie realized that his house had been broke into.
Does anyone find it interesting, or is it just me, that the two crimes, the one at Bernie's house and the gun stolen from Broadway Bar, have the same three people in common? Eric, John, and Alan. And also, Bernie and the owner of the bar have one thing in common. They were friends with Eric. Sounds like being friends with Eric was risky, or maybe it was just coincidence. You know what they say about coincidences, though, right? I also asked Jo if she was ever interviewed by Nickel, given in Alan's statement he said that Eric and him had locked eyes. I wanted to know if Nickel brought her in to find out the events of that night and investigate if Alan or John had returned to kill Bernie. Jo said Nickel did bring her in for an interview, but it didn't go as Nickel had planned.
The day that I was questioned at the sheriff's department, when I was asked who I thought did it, since I didn't think Alan and John did it, and he tried to put me at the scene of the crime, I said, trick no good. I said, I was nowhere near it. He says, well, who do you think did it? I said, well, you really don't want me to tell you that. He says, yeah, please. He says, tell me. He says, who do you think did? He kind of got up a little closer on his desk, closer to my face. I said, I'm glad you're sitting down. I said, because you're going to need to be sitting down for this. He says, what? I said, you did it. His face turned as red as my hair. He swung his arms across the desk, knocked everything off the desk, got up, walked out the back door, back to the police station. It was an inside job in the police department.
Tell me why you think that.
Because the police department was taken off the case. Rick Coots lost his job over it and had to end up working security somewhere in Columbus at a hospital. By rights, Glenn Nichols should have been fired, and that's where I have my beef. I believe in my heart that man is the one who did it.
Nickel's response is very interesting to me from a behavioral standpoint. We have a detective who's in charge of investigating a homicide, and his reaction to being told that he was the one responsible is to, quote, swing his arms across the desk, knock everything off, and his face turns bright red, end quote. Are those not the actions or behaviors of someone who has something to hide? According to Jo, Nickel then just leaves and doesn't come back? Jo got more of a reaction from Nickel instead of the other way around. As the first day started to wind down, my team and I got some dinner and we went to Stefan's, my new favorite place. As we sat there having a few drinks and reflecting on the day, we all felt it was a success. I got to speak with Eric, talk with Olivia, followed up with Jo, and we got prepared for the next day. We all went to bed exhausted, but ready for day 2 when we would be meeting with Paula, Bernie's sister, and Asia from BCI. I can say that once my head hit that pillow, I was out. The next day seemed to arrive very quickly, but we were up and ready to go. Of course, I had to make my Starbucks stop. This is a must. But I have to tell you all what I drink because everyone seems to laugh at me when I order it. Is this too complicated? I get a Venti Skinny Iced Caramel Macchiato with soy milk upside down. If you haven't tried that, order it next time. It's really good. Once we got our drinks, though, we were off to meet Paula. I had only done Zoom calls with Paula and Steve, so I was really excited to meet both of them in person and let them know about Eric's visit. As you can imagine, Paula was anxious to hear what was said and get an update on the investigation. As we pulled into Paula's parking lot, she was already outside waiting for us with a big smile and open arms. Taking one look at her, I could see the family resemblance of her mom and Bernie. Paula is taller than I had imagined, but everyone is taller to me. I'm like 5'2". Paula welcomed the team into her home and we all got comfortable and ready to dig in. The first thing that I noticed walking in was Paula had laid out all of her dad's papers, photos, notebooks, letters, tapes, all across her dining room table for us. There was hardly an inch of the wooden table to be seen with the piles everywhere. And I had known Bernie's dad had done a lot of work to solve his son's murder, but this was a sight to see. If you haven't joined the Dog with a Bone Facebook page yet, come on over. I have actually posted the photo of all of the documents that were on Paula's table, as well as photos of the safe that night, drugs that were found at Bernie's house, and just a lot of other documents that I discuss in the episode. So come on over and take a look. As we started to review all of the documents, Paula had changed into her Dog with a Bone shirt and shared her thoughts so far on the investigation.
This is all just good news to me. You know, even if I'm not hardly saying words, but if we don't get anywhere, but I'm not thinking that, we're still shaking leaves.
Right.
We're still bringing it up instead of nothing.
Exactly.
So my expectation is I love this much even.
Right.
Mm-hmm. It's putting it out there.
Yeah.
Might make somebody a little worried.
Right.
Yeah, and that's what it does.
I think they already are.
Yeah.
That's
I think they already are.
I guess partway justice for me.
Right.
Here we are again.
Yes, here we are again, and we're not going anywhere. As we were going through the piles and piles of information, Steve arrived home. We had been waiting for Steve so we could share the exciting news with them both of what we had discovered the night before at Stephen's. Remember in the first episode when I mentioned that as far as anyone knew, including family and friends, Bernie did not have a romantic relationship? Well, I'm happy to say we were wrong.
Real quick, tell them.
Okay.
Tell them the
We
good
got-
news
we got
that we
good
found out
news.
last night.
Oh. No, it's not that crazy.
It's not bad news.
Okay.
I mean, it is
so
funny. You're gonna laugh.
You remember how you told me Bernie didn't have any girlfriends or have never been on a date?
No,
we thought.
tell me he didn't.
He did.
Tell me he
He
didn't.
did.
I'm glad for him.
We just found somebody last night who was in a romantic relationship.
What's she doing now? She married?
Yeah, she's married.
she's married now.
Yeah.
They dated for a little over a month or so.
I think she said 2 or 3 months.
Yeah. So she wasn't even from this town, and she had met Bernie, and they hung out a lot. And she said he was very respectful. She said if he had done drugs, she said she would have never known because he never did it around her.
Yeah,
and he
like
was
we
very
didn't
respectful.
know.
He was a good guy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
She said-
it was so funny how this happened because the bartender who I talked to previously, she's like, you know what? She's like, Bernie dated my cousin. And we're all like, what?
Well, as you can see, we don't know a whole lot.
I don't think a lot of people did. And everyone that I've talked to besides yourself who hung out with him never mentioned he ever. So we decided at that point, we're like, yay, Bernie, right?
Yeah, so those two split a Jack and Coke.
With the black velvet. Yep. This was my first ever black velvet and Coke, and probably my last. Unless we have an arrest, then it's black velvet and Coke for everyone. But I have to say, if you could seen us all in this moment, we were just so happy to hear that Bernie had relationships, and in this particular relationship, somebody he really cared about and treated with respect. These are the moments in any investigation that you bond with the family and are forever changed by this experience. After the excitement of that news, we headed down the stairs to their living room where they could watch the interview with Eric. After the interview was over, I connected with Paula and Steve to get their thoughts on what it was like seeing Eric now, 30 years later, and what he said now versus then. Here's what they had to say. What was your initial thought when I hit play and Eric showed up on the TV? What did you both think when you saw him?
Initial thought was he had aged, of course, and gray hair. I didn't recognize him. I hardly remember him. And to see him there, I wouldn't have known him at all if I passed him on the street.
He changed that much visually, appearance-wise?
Yeah, I wouldn't have known him at all.
How about you, Steve? What did you think?
Well, basically the same. Seeing him in the video, I would not have known it was Eric from the way I remembered him.
I remember you both mentioning like, oh my gosh, that's Eric, because you have that image of him, from 1993 stuck in your head. And then all of a sudden you fast forward to 2024 and there he is.
Exactly. Totally different person from what we remembered.
And as you watched the interview, was there anything that stood out to you?
Just how believable he is. I never really cared for him back 30 years ago. And I always felt kind of like he would stab you in the back if he was that type of person to me. And so watching the interview, I just didn't know. I just didn't think he was telling the truth. Or I just didn't believe he was because I just don't trust him. That's all. So everything that came out of his mouth, I just feel like, that's probably a lie, but maybe not.
I remember when we first talked, Steve, you had actually said the same thing. You were kind of like, I'm not really sure about the guy. I don't trust him. I think that he was using Bernie. I think he's kind of a snake in a way. Like you had instinct about him right away. And so I guess seeing him and having him in jail talking to me, you had that same kind of feeling?
I did.
How about you, Paula?
Well, I always see the good in people, I guess, and I'm too naive. So my thoughts on Eric back then, I always wondered what friends were good friends or what friends, would use John, because he was the kind of guy that you could use. Mm-hmm. So I always, worried about that. Then I always just hoped for the best, that surely he's a true friend. So I guess I always wanted to believe that. And I suppose I did. I really didn't have this exact same feeling as Steve did. And Steve can kind of pick people out better than me. And I always think they're just, good people.
Well, I think that's what you hope for, right? Like you always want to see the good in people. When you saw him, in the video and you listened to him, was there anything that you remember him saying in that interview with me that didn't make sense or didn't match what he said from 30 years ago?
I can't remember per se, because when I was listening to it, I was just thinking, I just noticed that he had changed his story on a couple different things. I mean, he'd say one thing one time and then 5 minutes later, it was a different story. Right. And so that's just what I got out of it. So I thought, he's lying. He can't even remember what he said 5 minutes ago, and then he's saying something else.
I think there was a lot of question, too, around, it's kind of insignificant, but it's also just something that shouldn't be that hard to explain, is where Bernie called from, where he called the cops from. And that seems like it should be a pretty simple answer. It shouldn't be so convoluted. And what I mean by that is we've heard from Eric back, in 1993 that Bernie went to a neighbor's house, and then it was Eric went to a neighbor's house. And then Eric tells me, no, he used his house line. And then when I pressed him further, he said, well, no, maybe he did have a cell phone and he was walking around in the house with the cell phone. So something so simple, it wouldn't be that hard to remember something like that.
I do remember what he told me back then, right after it happened, and it was that he told Bernie to call the police. And so Bernie walked down the street to a neighbor, and I don't know what neighbor it was. I think it was some older lady, and he went in and used the phone to call the police. That's what Eric told me back then.
Yeah, we always were told that he went to a neighbor that way. So that still stands for us.
What was your takeaway from watching and hearing him after all these years?
My opinion hasn't changed of him. I still think he can't be trusted. He's unbelievable.
I guess I think a little less of him now, since I felt he was more of a good friend. I feel a good friend would remember all that happening, even though it had been that. I remember things, that we were told, and we didn't live it. We weren't in the house. We didn't find John dead. We weren't there that night with the police, doing what they did. That to me, he should know exactly what happened.
I agree with Paula on this. And there are just things from my own past that I remember, and I'm sure all of you do as well, that are just ingrained in your memory. I would think that finding your friend dead would be one of those. Okay, I know this was a jam-packed episode with lots of information and details on the first 2 days of my trip back to Marysville. But let me unpack it real quick for you all as we move into the final episode of Dog with a Bone. First, Olivia claims that John had left the bar and they went home. They remained there the rest of the night. Both Olivia and Bo asked John if he was responsible for the murder of Bernie. John told Bo no. Both Olivia and Bo confirmed that there is no doubt in their mind that John was involved in the burglary, but murder? No way. I also circled back with Joe about Eric being the inside man and compared her statements from 30 years ago to now, and she lines up. Her story has not changed. Joe also shares Nickel's response when she told Nickel who she thought killed Bernie. And finally, I got to meet Paula and Steve. We also got to review all the work his dad did in trying to solve his son's murder. Paula and Steve got to watch Eric's interview and provided their thoughts. So where does this exactly leave us? Well, it leaves us at our last episode, their murder board. Who stays and who goes? Next time on Dog with a Bone.
Hi! Are you Angel?
Yes, I am.
Nice to meet you. I'm Melissa.
Nice to meet you.
Dog with a Bone is hosted, investigated, produced, and written by Melissa Sandberg. Additional writing by Caitlin Sandberg. Edited by Jason Sandberg. Theme music by Alex Yukich. Dog with a Bone is a Sasquatch production.